Welcome. Thank you all for coming. It's a real honour being back here at the National Drug Research Institute. I got my first job as a research assistant collecting data, Steve's here, isn't he? And Steve sort of thought he'd give me a go. That was about a 3-month contract, and then I've been in research for about 18 years since then. I'll want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on today, the Wadjak Noongar people, who are the traditional custodians, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal lands, it's a real. I was delighted by the Victorian Treaty the other day. I'm nervous about it though, because it could be removed from legislation as well. But hopefully that's in place for long enough so that we do have our first treaty in this country, which is extraordinary when you think about the history of this country and other colonial sort of places where we have the Treaty of Waitangi, of course, in New Zealand, and there's about 7 treaties in Canada. I'm presenting on a social emotional wellbeing program, but we don't do this work alone. This is a team. So we've got Dr. Alison Evans, who manages the project day to day, and then we've got 2 other researchers, which include, I will minimise that screen on the side there, which includes Anna Greger, who's a research assistant, and then we've got Kai Clancy, who's a research associate, and Kai's a Waka Waka man and his people are from Cherbourg, just out of Brisbane there. So a little bit more about me. Photo on the top left-hand side, there's my grandfather and his contemporaries. I'm older at my age right now than my grandfather is in that photo. He's sitting on the rock on the side. And most of our people, most of our community related to one of these, well, they were pretty young fellas back then, but one of these old fellas. And this photo was taken sort of between World War I and World War II. It was taken off the coast of Bardi country, which you see there, my home community, Juddington, and it's, I think I've got a close-up of that. And so I'll just go through a few more of these things as well. So I grew up in Geraldton and did my Aboriginal health worker training at the Kimberley Aboriginal Medical Services School of Health Studies. After about 10 years of working in Aboriginal Community Control Health Services, I moved to Curtin, as I mentioned, to NDRI, and then I've done a grad dip health promotion, did a Master of Public Health at the University of Western Australia, and my PhD was at UNSW, which I finished in 2018. I try to get back up to the community as often as I can, but it is a long way from Sydney and it's pretty expensive getting up there, but hopefully I get more research projects that can take me up there, so that'll make it a little bit cheaper getting to Kimberley. Not that that's what would motivate me for doing that. So today's presentation, look, I'm going to present about why the program is needed. And then I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of it. So we did a scoping review and then look at the aims and methods for the main part of the study, which is the qualitative section, and then the findings, and then the next steps after that. So we spoke about the 2013 referendum. That was brought about from the consultations for the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. The document that was produced from those consultations was this, which is the Uluru Statement from the Heart. What was really interesting from my perspective when consulting about the national sort of inclusion of us in the Constitution, this section came up. And so as proportionally we are the most incarcerated people on the planet, we are not innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is a torment of our powerlessness. So I like to reflect on this when presenting about prisons and about drugs and alcohol and all these things. This isn't happening because we are innately criminal people. This is happening because of the structural problems that there are in Australia. And while I can talk about doing a social emotional wellbeing program and how we can improve the treatment, we have to keep an eye on how the structures that are causing these issues within this country can be addressed as well. And we need to move some more of the conversation, particularly in drug and alcohol, back to some of that structural stuff. We have a lot of stuff going on about how can we offer better treatment. I remember my days at NDRI when we'd talk about the minimum unit price for alcohol. We're not having those conversations. So I think we need to push that into the future. Today, we're presenting on how we can actually work with people who are in the criminal justice system. So when we look at the imprisonment rate, this is from 2006 through to 2024. We can take this back a little bit further as well. And we see this ever increasing rate of imprisonment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people compared to non-Indigenous Australians. There are two stories here, as we can see. Non-Indigenous imprisonment has remained fairly stagnant, and it continued to do so prior to this. It's remained about that same level ever since. But we do see this upward trajectory. We have a few times where it's plateaued, but then it goes on and increases once again. This is a real structural issue. This is continuing to go, and we shouldn't be thinking about necessarily having individual solutions to this kind of problem that's happening. Where my work fits in with this project is, but hopefully there are several ways you can decrease imprisonment. One of those is to stop people coming into contact with the criminal justice system in the very first place. That's kind of gold standard, and that's what we really should be aiming, that you don't have contact to start with. Then you can go on to, if people have contact with the criminal justice system, to then minimise that contact so that they're unlikely to continue into that system or become enmeshed within that. The work I'm presenting today is about what happens when people go to prison. Hopefully people go into prison and we provide better treatment and sort of around addressing trauma issues and those kinds of things, then people are less likely to return to prison. That's particularly important with the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander population in prison, because about 3/4 of our mob who have been to prison before, which is much higher than non-Indigenous. So if we reduce that return to prison, that could actually have an impact on the overall rate of imprisonment. In terms of the rates and the numbers, we see here Western Australia, my home state where we are today, is leading as the highest rate of imprisonment per 100,000 for Aboriginal people. What can we say about this? So, is the Aboriginal population of Western Australia, say, uniquely different to Queensland? If we think about it. Or New South Wales. There are certainly some differences, but what you're likely seeing there is more about the way in which the criminal justice system actually operates in Western Australia is different to other jurisdictions. So if there were changes made around how that operates, then you can see an immediate decrease in Aboriginal imprisonment in Western Australia. When we think about the absolute numbers though, we see New South Wales and Queensland, they both have about a third each of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander population. So in terms of absolute numbers, most Aboriginal people are in prison in those two jurisdictions, and then you see WA. Often when we're talking about this on a national scale, nationally, people sort of reflect on the imprisonment in the Northern Territory. It's terrible. Every jurisdiction is terrible. But what we're seeing in the Northern Territory is the proportion of Aboriginal to non-Aboriginal people, which makes it look like there's a lot more Aboriginal people in prison in the Northern Territory, but the actual population of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is less than the population of Aboriginal people in Western Australia or New South Wales or Queensland. So you end up with a situation with about 90% or 95% of the prison in Darwin or Alice Springs. Alice Springs pretty much 100% Aboriginal. But that's the effect we're seeing in that particular jurisdiction. So the health and wellbeing of First Nations people, I've done a bit of work on this with the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, along with Professor Jocelyn Jones, who's at NDRI formerly, and Professor Megan Williams from the University of Technology, Sydney. So this is looking at the sort of First Nations versus non-Indigenous prison entrance. What I want to note here, though, is we're kind of comparing the worst of Aboriginal health to the worst of non-Aboriginal health. So non-Aboriginal people within prison have pretty poor health as well, and we do need to do better for them in this context. So while we see these differences, what we will also see is that the difference between First Nations people within the prison system, health is the gap between what you'd see in the prison is not as large for people in the community, where the health of First Nation, of Indigenous people in prison tends to be the very, very worst of mainstream or non-Indigenous people. If I'm explaining that. Did I explain that very well? I don't know why I seem to be stumbling a little bit today, but so in terms of substance use, alcohol, we've got about 56% had a possible alcohol dependence compared to non-Indigenous. Illicit drug use weekly or daily, you see a slight difference there. Intergenerational factors, this is where we do see a fairly big difference apparent in prison for Aboriginal people. That was quite common, and we're seeing more and more intergenerational imprisonment. During my PhD back in the day, two of the fellows had been in prison with their dads, and I think one of them had shared a cell with his dad, and he spoke about that as a really special kind of time, and it was. But it's also a little bit sad that that's where he spent time with his dad, was that they were sharing a cell together in prison. But we see this effect of intergenerational imprisonment more and more. In terms of out-of-home care, you've got 26% of Aboriginal people who have been in prison were also in out-of-home care compared to non-Indigenous people in that population. So, and when we think of mental health, if we're thinking social emotional wellbeing, we don't have particularly good measures around this within the prison system. So I kind of use the mental health as a sort of bit of a proxy. So we see that about 43% have been told that they had poor mental health at some point in time by a health professional, but non-Indigenous is about 36%. Overall in this population, about 70-odd% of people, 75% had some form of alcohol and other drug use disorder when you add it all together, and a big proportion had some form of mental health. So this is a group of people who really could do with better services and overall, prison has a way of collecting the most disadvantaged, and it's an unfortunate reality, but we really do need to do more in this space. So, developing culturally-based social emotional wellbeing program. I've done that slide a second ago. I've been preparing two presentations this morning, this one and another one, so sorry about that little bit of overlap. Emma spoke about social emotional wellbeing. This is the social emotional wellbeing wheel as developed by Pat Dudgeon and co. And I won't go through all of this right now, but this is a principle upon which we just started to develop the program in prison. Originally, I'd done a drug and alcohol, wanted to develop a drug and alcohol treatment program, but advice from elders, from other community members, from service providers was all very much saying, look, Michael, you can do that, but we really need to talk about social emotional wellbeing, and we need to talk about some of the underlying reasons why people are using drugs and alcohol. We need to talk about intergenerational trauma. We need to talk about the effects of colonisation and these kinds of things. So teaching people just about triggers and how to avoid triggers from that is just not going to cut the mustard, so to speak. So I moved to doing this, working more in a social emotional wellbeing area. It is a bit different from what I normally do, I have to say. So I've been on a bit of a journey as well, because I am more a drug and alcohol researcher than a sort of arts, mental health, I should say, as well. So the governance for the program, it is Aboriginal-led. The 4 of the 6 CIs are Aboriginal. It's qualitative predominantly, and we have governance through the Aboriginal Reference Group, and it has ethics approval from AHMRC and the WA Aboriginal Health and Aboriginal Health Ethics Committee. We also have approval from some of the sort of departments, Corrective Services New South Wales, as well as WA Department of Justice. Is to understand how cultural practices are currently used as part of therapeutic programs in the community, so we can use this knowledge to inform programs in prison. Yarning methodology, which is, some people say, how do you do yarning methodology? Because you need to get to know people before you have a really good yarn. I do understand that, but the interviews were done mainly by non-Aboriginal academic or researchers, and including myself, and you kind of just do end up just having a yarn about things, and they ask you questions and you answer those. So it's a much more free-flowing than a structured sort of interview that you would have. Aboriginal lens has been applied throughout the entire data collection and analysis. In terms of the scoping review, I'll just quickly go through this, and we'll go to the qual work again. So that was we undertook a scoping review when we started this project. We're in the process of writing this up at the moment, and hopefully that'll be in the next 12 months. But what we found when we looked at social emotional wellbeing programs was we found there were about 75 programs from Australia, or 75 all up, and there's New Zealand, a couple from New Zealand, Canada, and the USA as well. Of those programs, 65 were Indigenous specific, and 6 were multicultural. Those were mainly in New Zealand, where they have this terminology about biracial, I think is the terminology, because there's predominantly Māori or Pakeha, as I would say. So there's not a lot of diversity in New Zealand at this point in time compared to Australia. Most of the programs were targeting men, and most of them were traditional as well as a sort of Western model, so sort of a combination of the two. And the group settings or with an additional one-to-one counselling. The programs were either exclusively facilitated by Indigenous people or with co-led by Indigenous people facilitating the programs. So outcomes. What was heartening about this was it was about behavioural change and improved social emotional wellbeing. Was most of the measures that some of these programs were looking at, where we tend to in the criminal justice system look at the reincarceration as a sort of really blunt measure. So people do a program, they leave prison, they go back to community, and then they're re-imprisoned. Then it's kind of that ends up being the main measure. But looking more broadly at whether programs did improve social emotional wellbeing was a good thing that we saw in some of these programs. So in terms of the interviews with health professionals, I'm presenting on 2 questions. There were 6 all up, but we're presenting on how are cultural practices used as part of therapeutic programs in the community, and how this knowledge could inform the development of culturally based social emotional wellbeing program for young people in prison. I do use the term young people in this, so it is an adult program, but the reason why is that the funding round I got them for this was a young people's funding round. So I defined young people as 18 to 24, and so I do use young people, and that's what this was aimed at, but it'll be adaptable to older Aboriginal people in prison as well. So this is a summary of the participants, and you see they did some interviews here in Perth, which is at Wandjina, and also in Broome, which was facilitated through Milia Amara, and so we interviewed a couple of people up there as well, Sydney and the Central Coast, which is just north of Sydney, between Sydney and Newcastle, out at the Glen there. So they did about 27 interviews. So the key findings from research question 1, I've got a slide for each of these, but the sort of main themes: client-led, space and structure, trust and rapport, strength-based activities, and cultural principles. So client-led approaches, so it needed to be appropriate to the needs. So one of the common things the drug and alcohol workers, mainly as drug and alcohol workers we interviewed, so the last thing you do is say, so you've come in here and you've got a drug and alcohol issue, right? So the question is sort of more starts around, well, how are you going today? And having a conversation with somebody. And then leading on to, so you've referred here, and so what are you hoping from these sessions? And open the conversation in that way, and then to allow the client to lead that conversation about what it is they think they want during that interaction. Strategies were needed during the sessions to overcome issues that related to alcohol and other drug use, of course, and also to trauma. And it was multiple sort of different types of trauma, different level trauma as well. So we could have a whole seminar, several days worth of seminars on what that meant. But what really helped for the drug and alcohol workers is they could identify. So these were mainly Aboriginal, these were all Aboriginal workers. And so being able to have a conversation about those issues made a huge difference when speaking with clients. So you've got, this is a pseudonym. So you've got Ian, who's speaking there. I won't read that for you. You can speed read if you like. That was it's a good example of some of the data we got back. So in terms of space and structure, so a client-led approach once again, but to picking the environment was incredibly important. And so saying where do you want to meet and how that works for the person, which is not always possible, of course, within a prison system, but it was part of what came back with the data. So settings, as I was saying, it's trying to pick a place to meet in the prison is a bit not the best, but there are different spaces within the prison as well, and so this is where it's important to come through that, and each prison is kind of different and unique in its own way. Being aware that if you're dealing with clients who have been in prison, the rules and regulations. So the structure of the program, coming in with a preset sort of idea about the nature of the relationship between you and the drug and alcohol worker, if you like, may mean that they're overly structured, where it's a much more free-flowing sort of conversation when you're in a community setting. So being aware of that difference and helping the client move into having a different kind of relationship where it's more a therapeutic relationship. Mindful of the environment, and this came up again and again, but the natural lights and colours and how it all seems on the day. So if you pick a place and you go there, then how it kind of looks and feels on the day as well. So being able to be adaptable and sort of, I guess, change location if you think that's not the best place. So this is from the community interviews. As I said a few times, it's going to be a bit of a challenge in the prison. So building trust and rapport, a significant amount of time is spent getting to know the client. One of the worst things that people said you could do is go through like an intake form. It would be the worst thing you could do on the first day when you have a new client and go through all the different checklists and all of those things. But just spending a bit of time to say where you're from and how you're going and building that rapport. Our clients appreciated lived experience of substance use and incarceration from health workers. So this didn't mean that the person had to have been in prison themselves or had substance use, but the unfortunate reality that for me and most Aboriginal people is whether you have or not, somebody in your family has probably been to prison, you have personal experience in this space, and you probably have family members that may well have had substance use issues as well. And so being able to talk generally about those things made a huge difference with clients. Sharing about life within professional boundaries. So being more human with just talking about just things within professional boundaries. And this will be a bit of a challenge within the prison system, but it's important to be able to build a connection with people and be able to have general conversations like, if you play basketball or if you do those sorts of things, where often you're told to give away as little information as you possibly can to people if you're in the prison system itself, to people who are inside. So these are the things we will work through. So we've got Emma who's talking here. As I said, this is a pseudonym. I'll let you read through that. You got Emma talking about the sort of paperwork and the referrals and all of those things. And so one of the things people said is maybe talk about that sort of more formal side of stuff during the second session. So you could have a first session and then you just build group dynamics and those things, and then talk about the formal things during the second session. Strengths-based activities, so post-release support and healing programs. So linking people up or teaching them where they can go after was a big thing. So there's this assumption sometimes that there's an Aboriginal medical service, but people know how to link in there or even know that it's there. Indeed, back when I did the PhD, there's a fellow from Sydney who he didn't actually know there was an Aboriginal medical service in Redfern, and that was kind of completely new to him. So just assumptions that people know where to go and where to get supports is something that should not be made. So focusing on client strengths and achievements. So the drug and alcohol workers was very much about focusing on whatever it is that they've achieved and their strengths. So if somebody's done, say, a barista course or something, that may be the most important thing they've ever done. And you should celebrate that. So if you're, rather than comparing it or going down the line of, well, maybe you can do something else that's even better than that, just celebrate the actual achievement in itself. Examples of some of the strengths-based activities. So skills in transitioning from prison to AOD treatment back into the community. So people, you can talk to people about the strengths in the services that they can go to. You can support in secure housing can be a very difficult area to take a strengths-based approach, but you can speak about where can you go, where are the best places that you can go, who can you stay with, and parenting and support, and cultural connection, language groups and music. So if you can try and make these different activities or these different topics and try to approach them from a strength-based approach, that makes a huge difference. So cultural principles, Aboriginal-led facilitation for when you're doing treatment programs, having a non-judgmental environment, when having programs, having coffee, tea, food while yarning, and doing cultural activities while yarning. One of the women that was interviewed said that she just starts doing weaving sometimes, and then when she's talking with the client comes in, and then they just start weaving together, and so they just start doing that, and she's found that to be incredibly useful as a sort of a way in which to engage with clients. But there are all different ways in which, and it's kind of difficult in a sense when you want to describe what exactly is a cultural approach. It's kind of just something that you kind of do if you're an Aboriginal drug or alcohol worker or mental health worker in the community. And describing those things it can be a little bit of a challenge at times. But people had their own way of working with their Aboriginal clients. In terms of the key findings for research question 2, connection to cultural spirit and the dreaming, personal family health, education and behaviour change, cultural activities, and then there were some practical considerations when we were talking about sort of cultural programs and how that might work within a prison context. So physical and personal family health. So some of the findings came back around physical and mental health, family and intimate partner relations, and parenting. I haven't done all the coding for this, I have to say. So some of the rest of the team have done that. What I do know about, I'll go back to that just one second. So family-friendly programs, family-led decision-making, and family and domestic violence. So some of the data that came back from this was around how do we work in a family-friendly way, and there were some interesting points that a lot of the resources and the way in which some of the structured conversations happen around family violence are very much positioning men as perpetrators and women as victims. And that might be the case, but the way in which some of that has been structured can be very unhelpful if you use the material as it's kind of prescribed. Within the prison setting, it may be more that when we're talking to fellas as we go forward with the program, that we have a general conversation and then perhaps have a more specific conversation at a later point, because it's not really a way in which to win clients over if you're going to start talking to Aboriginal men and say men are violent, and that's your leading part of the work that you're doing with them. So there's all different kinds of layers upon which, when we got the data back, analysed it, of how the approach could be for the program. They did speak about family-led decision-making was an important point. Once again, in the prison system, that may be a little bit different, but it was very important when in the community setting. Education and behavioural change, education, day-to-day living skills. So this is one of the things that came through as well. And so day-to-day living skills. So people spoke about if people didn't have a lot of confidence in day-to-day sort of things like washing your clothes and other stuff that you may just take for granted, or computer literacy, as we've got there, budgeting and vocational planning. Not having those skills could cause quite a bit of sort of depression, and so if you talked about those things and worked through those things as part of your program, that could also help instill a sense of social emotional well-being, a sort of greater sense of empowerment and locus of control, sort of internal control about how you can do some of this yourself. AOD harm reduction, and talking about how to reduce harms from alcohol and other drug use was an important part of the sort of education around behavioural change. So we've got Trent speaking here. Okay, so so some of the cultural activities, when asked about some of the things to do with clients, so the people said the most common things that came up were about sort of yarning circles, learning on country, song and dance, and arts and craft. These were followed by hunting and fishing and cooking. So when some of the people we interviewed had actually done some of the activities within prison, including sort of art, dance and song. And it's after having visited Canada and spending some time over there, it's really kind of striking how we do not just incorporate this within our day-to-day way in which we do things, whether it's in the community-based organisations or within prisons. And so as we move forward, this is an important part of what we will be wanting to do with this particular program. So in terms of practical considerations, proper funding, as was said over and over again, and this seemed to be an issue for a lot of the workers we spoke to, because everybody was talking about being on short-term contracts and the instability of that. And it's important to reflect on, because if that's how your workers feeling, is they've got 12 months funding and they're not sure if they're going to have a job anymore, this kind of affects the way in which and the confidence within which a program is delivered. More First Nations staff, there's a critical shortage. That's pretty much ubiquitous across the entire sector, as we need more First Nations staff. Connecting people with rehabs as well. So being able to refer people onto and not having enough rehab spaces. Indigenous shirt or clothing tied to the program, and cultural activities needed to be appropriate for the traditional lands upon prisons situated. So people spoke about doing different types of cultural programs, but when we said, well, how would we do that within a prison setting, that kind of came back unanimously that well, it's about where the prison is. So if you have a prison here in Perth, in Wujak Noongar country, you would do activities that are appropriate to the people here, rather than trying to plan for the entire diversity of the entire prison population. Flexible format to suit each different prison security level as well. So this is a very critical consideration as we move forward. Program participation for Indigenous and non-Indigenous clients. Some of the non-Aboriginal fellows in prison, they will have Aboriginal partners and they'll have Aboriginal children. So saying that they're not allowed to do a program is not going to be a good thing for them. So they need to be able to undertake this program as well. There's also growing research from Aotearoa, New Zealand, that's showing that the Māori programs are likely having a bigger impact upon the prison population than the mainstream programs, which is quite interesting in its own right. So it may be that Indigenous programs have a particular impact for clients as well. So you got Dennis speaking here. So he's sort of saying about teaching about things in a blackfellow way. This comes through a bit, and so teaching as if it's a sort of a classroom setting is not necessarily going to work in the right way. So in summary, what we found was client-led approaches to understanding and heal underlying causes of alcohol and other drug use. Relationship and trust building are key. Importance and connection to culture, family, community, spirituality, and emotions. And implication for further research to understand from inmates what they want to learn. So the research I presented was about the community. So future research will be specifically on what inmates would like to learn themselves. So the next steps from where we're going, well, develop a program of lesson plans, which we've done. We're conducting a Delphi study at the moment. We're in the final stages of that. And then we're having a yarning circle with young people, which is to focus group test the program. And we're looking to pilot in 2026, 2027. We're in conversations right now, fingers crossed, so we'll get some funding to do that. This is a program that we developed. And at this stage, we have 10 sessions. There's actually about 15, but we decided to make a 10-session package. And there could be up to about 20 sessions. And each of these, the idea is that people will be able to come in and out, but it's a little bit sort of difficult if we're doing the introductions as a very specific session. But what we hope is that people could continue on and do the whole 10 sessions together. But if somebody came in and did a couple of sessions, it can be a sort of standalone in its own right. So I want to acknowledge the chief investigators. Some of them you might know Dr. Robin Williams, who I think is now Associate Professor Robin Williams here at Curtin University. Associate investigators, partners, the organisations and our research team. Our funding was from the MRFF Indigenous round.